Hi, everybody. We're here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey, and I'm speaking a little loud because we've got a lot going on here behind me, as you can see. Today, we're going to talk about scale and gauge in model railroading and what that means to you, the beginner, or even you seasoned model railroaders. Most of you guys already know, but we're going to talk for the beginners here. As you can see on my layout here behind me, I have 4 different sizes of trains running. And that's not to say that's the only sizes that are available. There are other scales available than the 4 I have here, but these are the mainstream scales. These are the scales that are most popular and you're going to find the most product available for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it down in here. What I'll do is let me bring the laptop down so you can see what I'm talking about here. I'll bring it down tight here. And what I'll do is I'll park each train and tell you what the scale is on them. So here comes the big one here. What we'll do is bring him around. Have my controls back here. This first train, actually, you know what we'll do? Yeah, I'll start with this one. This is large scale. And you can see I brought my Thomas trains out because I had Thomas in all 4 scales. So I thought it'd be really interesting to compare them. So this right here is large scale Thomas. Large scale is also referred to as G scale or G gauge, and that's because it was developed as an outside train to go out in the garden as a G, garden railway. So large scale G scale is about scale-wise 122.5, and it's a narrow gauge track. It's gauge to narrow gauge. We'll get to that later. We'll talk about scale versus gauge. So this is large scale. The next line in here, and I'm going to stop him when he comes around. And I have a little remote here for this guy in the middle. He has a little whistle. I can blow the whistle and so forth. This is O scale Thomas, or O gauge. We'll park him right there. Hopefully I can get him to stop. This is hard to do with one hand. All right, so there's O scale Thomas. Large scale O scale. The next size down is half the size of O scale. That's going to be HO scale. HO, half O. So we'll stop him. Oop. He almost got past me. We'll back him up a little bit. All right. And creeping around here on the end is the newest item from Bachmann, which is teeny tiny Thomas. This is Nscale in here. So we have large scale, O scale, HO scale, and Nscale. Those are the 4 major scales that we sell here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. So I'm going to bring my laptop back here, and we'll talk just a little bit here about the differences between the gauges and scales. So if you have comments or questions, please leave them for me and I'll answer them for you. It's kind of tough here with one person to answer every question as it comes in, but feel free to leave comments in the comments section of this post, and I will definitely get back to you. Also, feel free to come into the store. It's AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. We're on Route 30. Just come on in. We have a train layout here that shows 3 of the major gauges. I don't have large scale set up because it's too large for the store. You can see I got a large scale up here. You can see how big it is. But we'll talk about the 4 major scales. Now, large scale, as I say, was developed in the mainstream by LGB in Germany in the late 1960s, about 1968. And if you excuse me for one second, I'm going to turn O scale Thomas off because his boiler's banging in my ear here. I'm just going to pop him off the track. Good. That's better. He's just like a real steam engine. He sits and his boiler bangs away. And that's digital sound. We'll get to that too. So the things to consider when you're looking at trains is large scale, like I say, LGB, Aristo, Bachmann, various other manufacturers. It was really developed to go outside. It's large. The minimum radius turn on a large scale train is 4 feet. So under a Christmas tree, it looks good, just a circle. It's a 4-foot circle. That's as tight as it goes. And from there, it gets larger. When you get into big locomotives, you can see I got this P42 Genesis up here. That's an LGB engine. You have to start building outward and making wider turns so you can accommodate bigger trains. So you're looking at 8 to 10 foot curves. So you need to go outside. And really, it's like building a real railroad. That being said, like I say, a 4-foot circle of LGB or G gauge under the tree is great. That's what I do every year under the tree. I have my LGBs under there. The next scale, which is probably over the years been one of the most popular toy train scales, and the reason I say toy train is because these trains, O-scale trains like Lionel, there's various other manufacturers that have done O-gauge. O-scale O-gauge was developed as a toy. In other words, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and a lot of them are referred to as post-war trains because they came out right after World War II. O-scale trains were developed to be played with for a children's toy. In other words, every kid for Christmas, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, wanted a Lionel train, and they were going to play with it, and they were going to play with it hard. That's what I have here. I have here a 2026 Lionel engine that was my father's first train for us growing up, and he bought these in probably the late 1950s. And this engine's been through heck and back again. I mean, this engine's been run to death, and it's still going because you can still repair older O-scale trains. And O-scale, the reason, and I want to grab my track here, and I should have showed you this to begin with, but I'm going to show you right now. There's different sizes of track, obviously, for different trains. And the reason I'm bringing the track out is we looked at large scale. That's large scale. You can see large scale has 2 rails. And if you're running it, you have positive, negative electricity going into the train. So one rail is positive, one rail is negative. O-gauge, Lionel, is 3 rail. You say, why is there 3 rails? Wouldn't it be positive, negative? Well, they did 3 rail back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. I'm not sure exactly when this track came out. It was probably in the 30s, 40s. They did 3 rails so that they could make wiring accessories a lot easier. In other words, the center rail on Lionel is positive in O-gauge, and the 2 outer rails are negative, or the ground. So if you wire an accessory to this track or to the old tubular track, you could insulate one of the negative rails and hook an accessory to it so that the rail acted as a connection for the ground. So the accessory would operate as soon as the wheels on the train ran over that isolated rail, it would finish the connection or the ground, and the accessory would operate. And when the train got off of that rail, the accessory would stop. So crossing gates, flashing lights, they were easier to wire with the 3 rails. That's why you have 3 rail in O-gauge. There are guys that do O-gauge with 2 rail. They're called high railers. They're the guys that want to do scale. That's 2 rail. Okay, so we had large scale, O-gauge, or O-scale. S-gauge or S-scale is in between O and HO. And let me hit my thing here. S-gauge is American Flyer. American Flyer was Lionel's competition in, I guess, the 40s, 50s. And they did more scale trains because they were a little smaller than O. They had, the ability to do scale trains in a smaller space. As you can see, the track is a little bit smaller. Rail to rail, the gauge of the track is smaller than O. So that's S-gauge. S-gauge is one of those things where it's kind of a niche in the hobby. Lionel makes the track. They did make some cars. I don't know if they still do, but there aren't a whole lot of manufacturers doing S right now. It's more of a collector scale. The guys that do S-gauge are out buying old, old American Flyer trains and things that were built way back in the day and collecting it. So that's S-gauge. So we had large scale, O-gauge, S-gauge, and then HO. HO trains are probably, or HO scale is probably the most popular scale out there. The reason being, model railroaders do it, beginners do it, and there's a lot of product available for HO. It's something that you can do a really detailed model railroad scale model railroad with HO, and you can start out with a 4x8 board and expand from there. So on a 4x8, you can build a pretty big HO layout. HO got popular in the 50s and 60s and continues through today. And then after HO, the smallest trains are Nscale. A lot of people like Nscale because it's unique, it's different, it's small. There are smaller trains than Nscale. There's actually Z-scale trains, and they're mostly made from what I understand in Europe. Märklin and some of the other German companies make Z-scale trains. Z-scale trains are really cool. It's like a briefcase. You can build a train layout in your briefcase because they're so tiny. But to me, they're more of a boutique item. They're not available plentifully. You know, you can't get a whole lot of Z scale. So our main scales are going to be N, HO, O, and large scale. They're the four biggies. Now, the thing to think about when you want to build a model railroad, and the reason we're talking about this today is because the holidays are coming and everybody's getting their trains out. There's people that are just getting involved. They're coming in and they're saying, oh, my little boy, he likes trains. My little girl, she loves Thomas the Tank. And they want to get started. So what you need to think about is, number one, how much room do I have? And who's going to be running the trains and touching them and playing with them? My suggestion is, if it's an older child that's interested, that has the ability to build and take care of things, then HO and Nscale are pretty good. They are more delicate than O scale and large scale. O scale is what I recommend. You know, like these guys here, the 3-rail O Lionel trains. I recommend those for children because they can be handled and they won't break. There's not a lot of external detail. I mean, that's not to say that O scale trains don't get up there and get a lot of detail if you spend the money and you buy scale trains and you're really into it. But in beginner sets, like starter sets and things, they're built to be handled. They're built to play with, just like Lionel was in the post-war years. You know, you buy it, you put it on the floor, you let the kids play with it, and don't worry about them breaking it. I see too many model railroaders that get all excited and bent out of shape because kids are touching their trains. If you don't want kids to touch your trains, don't put them down in front of them, because a kid's natural reaction or a child's reaction is to go down and grab it and play with it. And that's the way it should be. Like I say, this engine here we had since the late 50s in my house, and it still runs. It's still in decent shape. The next thing to consider is, how do you power them? And I want to talk about this because people are coming into my store right now looking for transformers, you know, power sources for their trains. And I brought out a few transformers here to show you. You have to pick the correct transformer for the scale of your train. So large scale transformers, I don't have a large scale transformer here on display because we don't do a lot of large scale in the store. You know, we get maybe a set or two now and then, but a large scale transformer should be something that can handle a train that has large motors in them. Most of these big engines have like 540 motors in them, which means they drive a lot of amperage, 3 to 5 amps usually. So you have to have a transformer that's rated to drive a large scale train, and they're available. You can buy them. They're DC transformers. They just have a higher amperage rating than a standard HO or Nscale. Nscale and HO are also DC transformers, and I brought out a sample of an HO transformer. And this transformer here, this is an MRC rail power transformer. As you can see, it has a throttle on it. It's got a direction button. Oop, try not to flash too much on you there. It also has hookups on the side of the transformer here for, and we discussed this before, for accessories and track. So you can run your train with that. Plus you can hook in accessories like turnouts and lights and things like that. So if you've got an HO train and you need a transformer, this is the type of transformer you want. You want a 18 volt DC model train transformer. And I've got plenty of these. So HO and Nscale, that's what you're doing. When you go up to O scale, which is Lionel, that would be a little bit different because O scale, like I say, is 3-rail and it runs on AC voltage instead of DC. Nscale, HO, large scale are all DC direct current transformers. O scale is kind of the stepchild. It runs on AC power, and that's what this is. If you've got a Lionel train and you can't find the transformer and you come to my store, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you this MRC pack. And as you can see, it says it right here. It's an AC train controller. And the reason it's AC is, and I'm not an electrician, so please don't take this as Bible or you know, I don't know. AC power can be offset to throw or to operate some of the features on AC or O scale trains, like the whistles, the old air whistles. You had to push a button and it sent an offset into the power to trigger that whistle or to open a coupler or turn a light on or whatever. So that's what you want for O scale. You want an AC transformer. And that's what I have here. And I brought these two pieces just to kind of show you guys, because a lot of people come in and say, I've got old Lionel trains. And you can see how big and hunking these big old Lionel transformers were. This is an old Lionel ZW. This goes back to the 50s, and it still operates. I mean, it's a good piece of equipment. You just have to, if you have old transformers like this, make sure, number one, check the power cord. Check your cords, because over time, they age poorly. In other words, they dry out, the wires get bare, and that can cause a fire if you're not careful. So you can replace the power cord on it. On transformers like this, you also need to check the rollers and the connections on the inside of the transformer to make sure they're good. Now, that being said, older transformers don't play very well with newer equipment, and when I say that, I mean newer trains. And this is an old Lionel train, and I'll blow the air whistle for you. And this is going to be pretty poor because the air whistle in this guy is really shot. But just so you get an idea, and you'll all recognize this. And this is the other thing. See how this train wants to go? Old Lionel have mechanical E-switches in them. They don't have circuit boards to control forward, reverse, lights, and so forth. They have old mechanical switches that surges in power don't affect these. And I've got him turned up. I'm going to hit the whistle button. Hopefully you'll hear this. And that's pretty poor because the bearings are shot in the whistle unit in there. But you remember the air whistle, the woo-woo. So on newer trains, and this is a newer Lionel Hudson, the newer trains have electronic circuit boards in them. And what you need to be careful of is, if you buy new equipment, and let me set off the whistle on this, just so you hear the difference. You heard the little air whistle. Well, here's what an electronic digital sound. It's pretty impressive. Really impressive. What you need to be careful of is if you buy a newer locomotive that has digital sound, digital boards in it, and you have an old transformer, the older transformers' circuit breakers do not throw quick enough to save that board if the train comes off the track and shorts. Newer transformers have circuitry in them that'll flip that circuit breaker immediately when it feels a surge in the power from a derailment. But the old transformers, the circuit boards or the circuit breakers trip much slower. And it didn't matter back in the day because they had mechanical reverse units, which a surge in power really didn't affect it. But a surge in power on an electronic board will fry the board if the power keeps going too long, the surge. So think about that. If you've got Lionel transformer, an old one, and you're thinking about running newer equipment, you may consider putting a quicker circuit breaker in the line, or what I would suggest is buying yourself a new transformer that's built to run newer equipment, because it'll run the old stuff too. So keep that in mind. That's important when it comes to transformers. Let me think. What else do I have to tell you about? Transformers, track. The newer trains also, they're doing Bluetooth hookup. I have a Lionel Polar Express over here. Let me show you that. You can see him right in the center. That's the Polar Express. And what we'll do is, we've taken Thomas off the train. We've taken Thomas off the track. And I'm going to take the Polar Express and put it on the track. And with newer Lionel, they have a Bluetooth chip in the engine. And I don't know if you can hear it, but the engine's making a little sound. That little doo-doo-doo. That means it needs to be paired with something to run it. So instead of a regular transformer, a big box like I just showed you, you have a wall wart or a little transformer that plugs into the wall, and that plugs into the track. And then you use this piece here, and I turn it on. You see the light came on. It's going to pair with the engine now. So now this is my controller for the engine. It's paired via Bluetooth. So what I'll do is, I'll start the engine up. You can see it goes. Chuffs away. Bring them back. The other nice thing about these is they feature digital sound. And since this is the Polar Express, you would expect to hear Tom Hanks coming out of it, which you will if you hit the buttons here.
All aboard! This is the Polar Express!
Plus you have a whistle and a bell. And that's great stuff. And the other cool thing about Bluetooth is, I'm going to turn this off. Hopefully he'll go back into programming mode. I can get my iPhone out or my Android. See, he shut down and now he's chirping again. He wants to be paired with something. Well, Lionel has an app that you can download now. It's called Lion Chief. These are all the Lion Chief sets. And I open that up. You can see it right here. And what I do is I touch this right here and the Polar Express engine shows up. And I touch it and then I pair with it. So now my phone can control this engine. So I'll go like this. And there he goes. I can change the direction, bring him back. And I can set the sounds off.
All aboard! This is the Polar Express!
If you have kids, this is really the way to go. If you don't have any trains, and I recommend these to everyone that has little ones. We know kids love to play with their devices now. This is a way to get a child to play with a physical toy, plus use the device to interact with it. And it's really great technology. As I said, you can use the controller, handheld, or you can use your device. And it's really simple to do. There are other, and I'm going to shut this Polar Express off right now. And then I'm going to shut the app. Okay. So, starting out, beginners, scale and gauge. I recommend Nscale, Lionel size, for beginners, especially children. It's very easy to handle. The interface, the Bluetooth interface is really great. It works really well. There are Nscale trains that have the old controller with an air whistle, let's say, but it's nowhere near as fun as having the digital sound and the digital effects in the controller. So think about that if you're just starting out. One other thing I wanted to talk about in reference to scale and gauge. And this can be a little convoluted for a beginner, but when you talk about the scale of a train, the scale of a train is the size. In other words, the proportion of the model train to the original. So like if you build models, 1/24 scale cars are 1/24 of the real car. So it would take 24 of these cars to make the size of a real one. If you're looking at trains, scale and gauge works where scale is the proportion of the train to the real one, but gauge is the width between the rails of the track. And you might say, well, what difference does it make if I know both the scale and the gauge? There's two types of trains. There are standard gauge trains, which are trains like we see every day, the big Polar Express train, the Amtrak P42 that's running down by your house. But then there's also narrow gauge trains. And what's narrow gauge? Narrow gauge trains are standard sized trains, but the trucks or the wheels that they run on have a tighter base. So the track is narrower. And you'll say, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. Well, it kind of does, because with narrow gauge trains, I can have an O-scale train, then I can have an O-scale narrow gauge train. Narrow gauge trains in reality, in real life, were developed to work on really tight spaces, like coal mines and logging operations, where they don't have a whole lot of room for trains to run around, so they need them to navigate tight turns and so forth. And what I'll do is, I'll show you, I'm going to bring you over here for just a second, just to explain this really easily. I think you can see these. This is an HO train. This is an O-scale train. This is a narrow gauge O-scale train. And this is an O-scale standard gauge train. So these two here are O gauge, or O-scale, I should say. Don't confuse you. O-scale, O-scale. The difference is the track. This is a narrow gauge track, so it's HO size track, but it's an O scale train. This is a standard scale O scale running on standard O track. So that's the difference, is the size of the wheelbase between O scale narrow gauge and O scale standard gauge. And I know that's really confusing. It's confusing to a lot of people. And you don't have to worry too much about it, because most of the guys that do narrow gauge know exactly what they're doing and what they're talking about. But I just wanted to explain the difference between scale and gauge. A lot of people refer to trains O scale, HO gauge, blah blah blah. Just think about scale. Say O scale, HO scale, large scale. So that's what I have today. Like I said, we're here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. We have plenty of trains for you this holiday season. I have mostly HO, Nscale, O gauge. Recommend O scale for most of the kids. We just got in a big shipment of Lionel trains. So come on down. If you are getting your O scale out, getting your HO out, you're getting your Nscale out, and you need track, you need parts, you need an engine looked at. We don't do repairs per se, but if I'm here, I'll take a look at a train for you and tell you what's wrong with it. It's usually not that difficult. You just pop the top off and look, and usually it's a wire's disconnected or something of that nature. Old trains, they're a little tougher because sometimes you can't get the parts and so forth. So come on down to AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. Check out our train display. See what scale fits you. I highly recommend a train under your Christmas tree. It's one of those things where it becomes a really great tradition to get it out every year. I did it for my children year after year, and we always did O gauge because I liked all the working accessories, because it's more of a toy. We had the log car, we had the milk car that threw milk cans out, we had the crane that lifted things up, and the kids played with it all day long. And every year I would put them up, and it was a tradition. My dad did it with us. Every year at Thanksgiving, Dad brought the train platform in, and that was it for us until after Christmas. We loved it. So I recommend getting into it, start a tradition. The year I didn't do it, my daughter was on me like you wouldn't believe. Dad, we have to put the trains up. Got to put them up. It's tradition. And we did, and she helped me. We had a really good time with it. So it's good bonding time with you and your family. Get some trains, put them under the tree, build a platform. This is the perfect time for it. Everybody's got spare time right now, and it's a really good way to spend quality time. And you'll enjoy it. Trust me. You'll be building houses, painting figures, doing landscape. I love doing the landscape on trains. So scale and gauge, Nscale, HO, O scale, large scale. Check out O scale if you haven't done any. I think you'll like it. Come on down, see what we got Lionel wise. AAA Hobbies, Magnolia, New Jersey on Route 30. Hopefully we'll see you soon. Come in, talk to me about trains. And leave comments for me. I will answer any questions you have about toy trains, scale trains, whatever. So we'll see you next time for Sunday Afternoon Live on Facebook. And let me know what you want to see. See you next time.